Steve, thank you very much for joining us today. How are things in Baltimore?
Things are very rainy and wet, Jimmy, and pretty cold too.
It is the same way in Toronto. We're not too far away from one another, but it's been a very cool spring. So the semester is over. Are things pretty quiet now at Johns Hopkins?
Well, not for me because it just continues 24/7, 365 days a year. So I've got my research team in gear as always. So nothing really changes much for me.
And how many students are on your research team?
During the regular year, it's about 31, and during the summer, it'll be more or less half that, something like that. So
Well,
it's a pretty good crew. They're churn out a lot of stuff.
I might have to send my kids down there for a part-time summer job.
Yeah, well, yeah, that'd be great.
So, Steve,
I'm trying to think if I've had any Canadians lately, but I don't think I have. But do have a lot of foreign students.
and I do want to touch on that later, but before we do that, I want to first ask you about the Canadian economy. And so much has happened since the last time you and I spoke. And one of the big things is the fact that we have a new prime minister, Mark Carney. We had a federal election in April, and the Liberals won a fourth consecutive term. They have a minority government, though. They only got 169 seats, and they need 172 for a majority, but we'll see what happens here in the coming weeks and months. But I want to lay the groundwork for the benefit of viewers who might not be too familiar with the Canadian economy and what's happened here in the last 10 years under the Liberal leadership. And I want to start with GDP. Okay, in 2015, the GDP was 1.8 trillion. Here we are 10 years later in 2025. The GDP is now 2.2 trillion. If you look at it from a per capita point of view, it's gone from 45,000 in 2015 to 55,000 now. And when you compare that to the US, the same during the same time period, GDP in the US has gone from 56,000 to 85,000. So a massive gap between the two countries. When you look at Canada's unemployment rate, it's currently at 6.9%. And in the province of Ontario, where I reside, the largest province in the country, 15 million people, the unemployment rate is 7.8%. That's a 10-year high. And then when you look at youth unemployment, get a load of this number, Steve, it's 14.1%. That's the highest it's been since 2012. So that's a little bit of groundwork for our viewers. And I know you know the Canadian economy well. I want to get your assessment on it, where you think the economy is right now, and where you think it's going in the coming months and quarters.
Well, you've given a nice summary there, Jimmy. It's it's basically stagnated and from, as you say, from a per capita point of view, slowly sink. The ship's sinking, basically. Let's put it that way. And if you look at the IMF forecast for real GDP growth over the next 6 years, they have the average at 1.55%. And of course, that's that's not per capita. You got to take the population growth rate and subtract it from 1.55, and that means you're not going to have very much growth. Now, usually that leads, by the way, to a lot of political instability. That kind of flatlining. It's not good. Uh, if you look at the U.S. economy and in the same 6 year duration, the IMF has the U.S. average 2.4, excuse me, 2.2% growth. So we got 1.55 in Canada and 2.2 in the United States. United States isn't red hot, but you can see it's quite a bit above Canada. And if you look at total factor productivity, now total factor productivity, you just take the labor input into the economy and the capital input into the economy, and you divide it by the total output in the economy, you get factor productivity. And in Canada, that is gone down, down, down. It's down to 0.5% a year, the productivity. The US right now, it's running 1.3% per year productivity. total factor productivity growth. So it's the Canadian productivity is less than half the growth rate of the United States. So,
And how do you explain that? Why such a disparity?
well, the disparity is the liberal government. I mean, it's just bad. The government is basically you say liberal. Well, it's a socialist government. So you've had a dose of socialism now for how many years? You said
10 years.
10, 10 years. Yeah, that's half a generation. That's a long time. And probably I think my conjecture is that the liberals, the Canadians were pretty fed up with the liberals and they would have thrown them out in the election. But Donald Trump basically reelected the liberals because Trump got in there and claiming he's going to have the 51st state and all this other BS that he's putting out, and the Canadians got their dander up. They woke up from their sleep. They're usually half asleep up there, and started raising hell about that. And Carney, who's shall we say, not an exciting politician, to put it mildly, won the election solidly, and it was strictly because of Trump. So, the Canadians can thank Trump for continuing to have the Liberal Party in Ottawa and basically keeping a noose around the economy. And you can see the troubles. I mean, you go out to those western provinces like Alberta, and God, they want to secede from Canada. They don't like there are a lot of rebels in Canada, but they're all out west. They're not where you are or in Quebec.
Now, you raise a good point because in the month of January, just a few short months ago, the Liberal Party was all but dead. They had a lot of people were saying they were going to lose official party status, which is 15 seats in the House of Commons. And then, all because of the president's rhetoric, it just revitalized and gave new life to that party. But I guess one of the things that really shocks me is the fact that when you look at the last 10 years, okay, this government has failed. The liberal government has failed in so many ways. And you see it in the economy, you see it on the unemployment rate. But I wonder if people are even aware of that, or if they're just totally oblivious.
The Canadians are just going to have to suffer through another liberal government. We'll see what happens the next time around. Now, one thing about Carney, I said, he might not be the most exciting politician in the world, but he was smart enough to run against Trump. He didn't run against his conservative opponent in Canada. He ran against Trump, and he did a good job of it. So he surprisingly he literally almost pulled a rabbit out of the hat. But it's interesting. Here's a man whose whole career has been pulling one rabbit out of the hat after another. I mean, how many people were governor of the Bank of Canada and governor of the Bank of England? It's unheard of. He was.
No one can deny he's got one hell of a resume.
Oh yeah, the resume, on paper, oh, wow, can't complain about it. And I got to give him credit. He did what he had to do to win.
Well, I don't care what your political affiliation is, if your party's red, blue, or green. I will vote for whatever party that I think is going to put forth the right economic policies that will lead to a stronger economy and a higher standard of living. And I didn't vote for the Liberal Party, but I hope the majority of people did. So I accept what the majority wants. And I just hope he implements policies that will make this country great again because it has the potential to. We just need the right leadership.
Yeah, the whole thing, they have to. Everybody, every place is drifting into this more statist kind of thing, and including the United States, by the way. That means that life economic life, as well as social life, and so it's being more politicized. The politicians have way too much power, and are intervening and making a mess out of things in the economy, as well as other aspects of life. So our liberties are really being eroded tremendously. That's really what's going on. What does the Liberal Party stand for in Canada? It's ironic. It stands for taking your liberty away. It has
It
not.
is very ironic.
It has nothing to do. It's anti-liberal. It should be relabeled the anti-liberal party. And by the way, the conservatives aren't much better. And it's the same deal in the United States. It's kind of a bipartisan thing. We have two parties in the United States, Republicans and Democrats, and God, one is just as bad as the other.
Yeah, it doesn't matter where you go. Governments are always trying to control you, and I
I
don't know
think
how to explain it.
if this keeps up, there's going to be no question that uh, there was a book written a few years ago by Hans Hermann Hoppe called "Democracy: The God That Failed." so, so that's where we're going. We're writing the next chapters to this, but you look at Europe, and it's just a complete disaster. It's a little bit more like Canada, a little bit more like Canada, Canada being less like the United States. So you end up with out of these countries that were in the West anyway, the United States, as flawed as it is, huge flaws, it's the best dirty shirt in town.
And so you think the Canadian economy is weakening? Where do you see it going? If we're not in a recession, do you think we will be very soon?
Uh, Depends on what happens with down south with the United States. A lot, and the United States is going to have a recession, I think, this year, because the money supply has been very anemic, essentially no growth in the money supply in the United States since April of 2022. So, and right now the money supply is only growing at 4.1%, and Hanke's golden growth rate, a rate consistent with hitting 2% inflation target in the United States, is 6%, or maybe a little north of 6%. So money growth has been too slow for way too long, and that means that obviously, depending on what the money supply is doing, after a year or two, it all that change in the money supply and the tenor of money supply will feed into the economy, which I think will give us a big slowdown. Now we have Trump on top of that, adding what I call regime uncertainty into the picture, where he's changing everything under the sun, creates a tremendous amount of uncertainty and causes investors to hunker down and stop investing. So, and when I say changing everything, I mean tariffs. Everybody's talking about tariffs. That's a big deal. All of this just weighs on an economy that would naturally slow down in the United States because of slow monetary growth. So slow monetary point. First step, slow monetary growth is going to mean we slow down. Then you bring Trump into the picture, and that adds this regime uncertainty that's going to put another weight on things, which increases the chances that we'll have a recession. Trump isn't doing us any favors, believe me.
You mentioned that word uncertainty, and we hear that so often. I mean, look at every company that came out with their Q1 numbers in the US, in Canada, talked about the word uncertainty associated with tariffs and the trade war. We're seeing that in Canada. I see it every day. General Motors just announced recently they're laying off 1,000 people from one of their plants here. We have a very strong auto sector in Southern Ontario. Hudson's Bay department store. It's a department store or a company that's been around since 1670, Steve. Okay, they first came here, they were trading beaver pelts. They just announced that they're shutting down, they've declared bankruptcy, and they're laying off 8,000 people. And even though those 8,000 people, maybe they're low paying jobs, but nonetheless, those are a lot of jobs.
A
Uh,
lot of
but
jobs. They're going to punch that unemployment rate up, and there's no question about that. So my view on Canada, just the bottom line, without getting into quarter by quarter forecasts of GDP or anything like that, it's basically negative. It's I gave you low productivity growth, lots of bad regulations strangling the economy, way too much power in Ottawa, and I see none of that fundamentally changing. So that means that the ship's going to just keep sinking, basically. That's the story up there. And what will add to that problem, in the short run anyway, is the fact that I think the U.S. economy will dive into a recession this year. And like it or not, Canada is very connected to what happens in the United States. Canadians, they don't like to hear that, but I mean, basically, they're an appendage of the United States. They might be a sovereign nation, as King Charles pointed out.
one other point I want to mention about the real estate market, because of course the real estate market is highly connected to the economy. And I don't know when the last time you were in Toronto, but downtown Toronto, there's been a massive proliferation of condos in the last 10 or 15 years. And now there's way too many, okay? And they're still being built. This year alone, there's like 30,000 coming online. Last year was a similar number. No one's buying them. Condo sales year over year down 30%. And in the city of Vancouver, down 20%. So things are going to get significantly worse with the real estate market too, as this economy continues to falter.
Well, we have the same general problem in the United States. The real estate market's pretty soft. It's been soft all spring, but that's a very interesting thing because housing and real estate are often very connected as leading indicators for the business cycle. So
So,
so
so
that
Steve,
it's just consistent with our general, shall we say, the general outlook.
Steve, if you were able to sit down with Prime Minister Carney, what advice would you give him on how to stimulate this economy and get it going?
You want to deregulate it, cut the red tape, get the cut back on the government. That's the key. And we have exactly the same thing in the United States. You look at this budget that was passed by the House in the United States last week, and I mean, it's ridiculous. The House is controlled by the Republicans. That's the same as the Conservatives in Canada. And and what did they do? They spent more money. They didn't control government spending, and the deficit is going to be huge, and pose probably a problem financing it. They'll be able to do it, but only at higher interest rates. And interest rate expense now is running a whopping 13% of the federal budget in the United States. It's more than Social Security and more than the defense expenditures. And the defense, what went up in the United States? A lot of increase, a big increase in defense expenditures, and that's this the Department of Defense. It's so screwed up they can't even audit it. They've never been able to do an audit there. So it's just money down a black hole. Like you talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. Trump's bugling all around that he and Elon Musk, this Department of Government Efficiency, is going to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. And then they turn around and they have the big, beautiful budget that Trump is trumpeting about all the time, has a huge increase for the Defense Department spending. So it makes no sense. It goes against, it's false advertising. You listen to Trump say one thing and actually he turns around and does exactly the opposite.
So, according to the Congressional Budget Office, it's estimated that this big, beautiful bill will add 2.3 trillion to the deficit over the next 10 years and 4 to 6 trillion to the debt over the next 10 years. And some people have said it's the largest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in the history of the US. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the transfer from rich to from poor to rich is uh, probably just propaganda. Number one, so I don't put too much stock into that. The biggest transfer, by the way, from the middle income and poor to the rich was the result of the Federal Reserve. It had nothing to do with government spending directly anyway, and that was when the pandemic started in February of 2020. We had the COVID pandemic, and the Federal Reserve goosed the money supply at its peak rate of growth. It was over 18% per year. That's the highest rate of growth for the money supply measured by M2 since the Fed has been founded in 1913. And that was followed, as John Greenwood and I accurately predicted using the quantity theory of money, that resulted in a big inflation. It peaked out at 9.1%. Greenwood and I thought it would peak at 9. We were about as close as you could get on that. And what happened? When you goose the money supply, things happen with a lag. One thing that happens is asset prices go up. Real estate, we were just talking about, stock price, land prices, all asset prices go up. And sure enough, they did go up. And who owns assets? Rich people do. Poor people are in debt. They don't on net. They have a net. They have a balance sheet that shows up a negative number on net asset position. So they don't own anything. They owe. They don't own. Now, if you look at the billionaires' wealth in the United States as a percent of GDP, when the pandemic started, it was 14.1%. Now it's over 21%. It's the biggest change in the distribution of income that we've had since World War II. At least I looked at that. Maybe it's the biggest transfer we've ever had in a short period of time. And so it's the Fed, monetary policy. Now that's slightly related to fiscal policy, because when the pandemic started, the fiscal deficit went way up, and who bought about 90% of the bonds that were issued to finance that huge deficit? The Fed did. And when the Fed bought, they credit the accounts of the sellers of the bonds, and the money supply goes up.
And what is the money supply telling you right now about the economy?
Right now, it's growing at an anemic rate of 4.1%, less than Hanke's golden growth rate of 6%, a rate consistent with hitting that 2% target. So they have quantitative tightening still on in the United States. They're still shrinking the balance sheet. So the monetary policy is tight.
So you think the Fed is behind the curve?
Yes. And they're behind the curve because they're data dependent. They watch the current data, and they don't realize that the current data, the cause of changes in the current data for finance and economic data, is the result of what happened to the money supply previously. So,
So
what happened a couple of years ago in the money supply is dictating what the current data are showing.
the Q1 GDP number came in at 0.3%, marking the first decline since 2022. Now, this was a bit of an anomaly. Much of it was driven by imports. They increased 41.3%, and this surge in the trade deficit subtracted 4.8% from the GDP. Do you think this was just a one-off, or do you see the economy, when we see the Q2 GDP number coming out here in a couple of months, do you expect another decrease? And when do you think we're going to go into a recession in the US?
Well, I think I just no one knows exactly, but so towards the end of the year, it's gonna keep sliding and deteriorating, and I think we'll get things towards the end of the year that negative.
One of the things that really surprises me about the current situation in the US right now is the unemployment rate. It's hanging in around that 4.1, 4.2% level, but yet we see company after company coming out and expressing or stating that they're seeing less demand from consumers. Doesn't matter if you look at American Airlines, Delta, Southwest, people aren't traveling anymore. If you look at McDonald's or Starbucks or Wendy's, people aren't eating as much as they were, right? All same store sales are down at all of those restaurants. Um, what thoughts do you have about the US consumer? Do you think they're feeling a lot of pain right now?
I think they're feeling certainly some pain because what happened is that the big increase in the money supply generated where did all the money go? Well, people didn't spend it right away. It accumulated, then they had what we call excess cash balances, and they had a big overhang of excess cash balances. They've gone through those, and by the end of last summer, they drained all of the excess off, and so the U.S. economy and the consumer, they're basically kind of running on fumes right now.
I read recently in 2024, 4.8% of Americans dipped into their 401ks. And that is up from 3.6% in the previous year, and it's up from 2%, the average of 2% pre-pandemic. What do you make of this data point? Is this a
Well,
reflection of how much pain people are
it,
feeling?
yeah, right. It's kind of consistent with what we're talking about. They've gone through a lot of. I mean, in aggregate, if you take everybody together, that excess in the cash balances has run out. And running when you're running on fumes, that means you're dipping in. Some people are dipping into savings. So that's that's basically what it means, and it's consistent with the story that everything's kind of slowing down already. And and by the way, the thing that occurs last in a business cycle thing is the labor market getting weak, because the first thing out of the box, a company, you're not firing workers. That's the last thing you want to be doing, because workers are valuable. You've trained them. They know what to do. So you want to retain them as long as you possibly can.
Steve, I want to get your thoughts on the S&P. It's been very volatile here in the last few months, but I have to say I'm surprised at its resiliency. Okay, so it peaked out in February at 6,100, went down to 4,800 in April, and then we've had this massive rally back. It's at 5,900 to 6,000. What are your thoughts on the S&P? Are you surprised it's had this big recovery? And where do you see it going
Well,
in the second half of the year?
I am surprised because I it's overhyped, overbought, overvalued, and so I don't think piling into the market is prudent. I mean, if you're a trend follower, yeah, that's the way you do it. But I think the market's in bubble territory. My bubble detector, Dr. X's bubble detector, which I've written about in Fortune and various other publications, indicates that we are in a bubble. Now the problem is, when's the bubble going to pop, or when's the air going to come out of it? And that is something that is very difficult to predict. All you can say is that it is in a bubble, no question about it. And the last bubble we had was the tech bubble, and you know what happened then? Eventually, that thing popped, and we had a hell of a mess on our hands for quite some time. So that's the picture there. My earnings forecast, which is in an article I wrote in Fortune magazine, is that I think will be at zero increase, or maybe even negative year over year. And the consensus, although the consensus has been ratcheting down, 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 down. It's still around 7%. So that the consensus started out the year like 13% or something like that. They just keep rolling it down. It's half of what it was originally at the start of the year, and I've always said I thought it was going to be less than that because of the monetary factor that I explained and the slowdown that as a result of anemic monetary growth. But then we get Trump, and Trump's added to the problem with this regime uncertainty. So I've even revised my profit forecast down to zero.
The last time we spoke, you were very bullish on gold. It's up 25% on the year. Are you still bullish on it?
Yes.
And
The regime uncertainty comes into play a lot with it, and the fact that the the, the tariffs are another thing that's basically weaponizing the dollar. The sanctions game was the big thing. That was weaponizing it. Now you have
Steve, you're a professor at Johns Hopkins, and of course, there's a lot of foreign students there, I would imagine. But the current administration has imposed restrictions on foreign students coming into the country and attending universities such as Johns Hopkins. Maybe you can speak to that and how it's impacted you and your fellow colleagues at the university.
well, this has just happened. Secretary of State Rubio ordered all the foreign consulates and embassies to stop processing, at least temporarily, visa applications of potential students coming into foreign students coming into the United States. So this makes absolutely no sense. This is part of this war with Harvard. The epicenter of this thing, if people are reading the press and paying attention to things, is Trump's war on Harvard. And this makes no sense whatsoever in the following sense. Trump, of course, he's whining about the trade deficit, the trade deficit. Well, we actually, one thing he never talks about is the surplus in services that the U.S. sells to foreigners: accounting services, legal services, financial management services, and tuition that's being paid by foreigners to American universities. Now that amounts to about $44 billion a year. I mean, it's a huge amount because the total export surplus of services in the United States, it's a surplus of 228 billion, and the tuition payments about 44 billion out of that. So, and to give you an idea of the magnitude, the total current account surplus deficit, the total current account deficit in the United States is about $1.1 trillion. So we're talking about very, very big numbers here. And why does Trump want to? These people can't add. He's attacking foreign students, which will cut off a lot of foreign students coming in, and they pay their own freight in most cases, and the amount of freight they pay is 44 billion. So he wants to attack foreign students and basically attack that source of exports. So that's one thing. That's just the arithmetic of it. And you mentioned Johns Hopkins. Now, Hopkins is the first research university in America. Most people don't know this. The first university founded as a research university was Johns Hopkins, and in 1876, by the way. And it's by far the biggest. People don't understand that. For the 38th year in a row, the research budget at Johns Hopkins is the biggest by far of any university in the United States. Is running now $3.8 billion. I mean, they're nothing like it in Canada. Even Harvard is 1.4 billion. Hopkins research budget, it's about 4 times bigger than Harvard's. So it's huge. And who mans all the research? Who's doing all the research? Well, graduate students are at the center of the thing. Of course, the faculty, but graduate students are the grunts who are running the labs and so forth. And 42% of the PhD students at Johns Hopkins are foreign. Master students, 28% are foreign. And so I have, you say my students, I have a lot of foreign students. So all of this is going to hit them like a sledgehammer, and will make a lot of enemies, foreign enemies, for the United States. And these are all the elites, the foreign elites. These aren't dunderheads, or these are the elites that form public opinion and so forth. So it cuts into the U.S. soft power thing big time. So Trump is doing a lot of damage with this foreign student war that he's entered. He's not only entered a trade war, he's entered a war against foreign students, which oddly enough, they're paying good money to come to the United States and study. That's an export the United States makes that's big. It's part of our service sector current account surplus. We run a surplus. We export a lot more services than we import. We have a big comparative advantage in that, which of course Trump never talks about that. He's just whining around about the trade deficit, which, by the way, the federal government is the biggest culprit, because we have a savings deficiency in the United States, savings less than investment, and that gap is actually the trade deficit. And where is the gap created? It's created by a fiscal deficit. The fiscal deficit is the biggest culprit and the biggest cause of the savings deficiency, and that savings deficiency, of course, is automatically filled by the trade deficit. What all this means is that you're going to have a huge disruption in research in the United States, and this is a big deal in the United States, because the investment in research is pretty high, and that's where you get a lot of innovation. I mean, where do you think Silicon Valley comes from? And why is it actually in Silicon Valley? It's in Silicon Valley because Silicon Valley's located close to Stanford University and the University of California at Berkeley. It's obvious that that's where they get the manpower. And if you look at the manpower, I don't know what the percentages are, but you have a great number of those foreign students who receive graduate educations at Berkeley and Stanford end up staying in the United States and staying in Silicon Valley. So it's a win-win for the United States. A foreign student comes, they pay the tuition. That's an export, part of the service sector current account surplus is that tuition that comes in. So that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect is that those people are manning the laboratories and whatnot, and acting as research assistants at American universities. So that's a plus. And then another plus is that all of them don't go back home. A lot of them stay in the United States.
And they become tax-paying citizens, and they contribute to the economy.
Yeah, it's in a way, what's the U.S. doing? Because of its great universities, it's skimming the cream out of all these foreign countries. It's taking the elites. It's a brain drain on the foreign countries. And where do the brains end up? Well, they end up in the United States. So that's been the process. And now Trump is disrupting the thing like mad, and which makes no sense. I don't know where he got the bee in his bonnet to do this, but it's a nutty idea with no logic connected to it at all.
So, Steve, one of the things I try to figure out when I talk to people like you is what's going on in the economy and how I should position myself and prepare for my future, my economic future. And the picture you paint is not a very good one, okay, in either Canada or the US. What advice would you give somebody like myself on how to prepare for what's to come in the months and quarters to come?
Uh, so I'm thinking back of what I learned in my youth. I learned I learned a lot of things, but one thing I learned is that the value of hard work. So you know keep your nose to the grindstone. That's one piece of advice. The second thing that I learned is you got to eat a humble pie every day. That's also a good thing. And the, the other things don't relate exactly to investing. It's just a matter of, shall we say, lifestyle. But one thing, in an agricultural country where I grew up, we were all Stoics. We weren't reading the great Stoics, but we were Stoics. And why were we Stoics? Well, we were Stoics because the weather dominates everything in agricultural country, and there's not too much you can do about changing the weather. So I never complain. Stoics never complain. The Stoics have a lot of characteristics, but one is that they're not whiners and complainers. So that would be another factor that I would stick into your pipe and smoke. And the other thing is try to find something that excites you and turns you on, and then hard work isn't work. It's just having a lot of fun.
Gotta have fun and never lose your sense of humor.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You got to have a laugh once in a while. Otherwise, life's really not worth living.
But in terms of economic advice, would you suggest investors stay fully allocated to the S&P, or should they shift
No,
a big part of their income into
oh,
bonds? Should they shift?
yeah, that kind of thing. The things we were talking about are more lessons of life, long term things. The more short term things are related to one's portfolio, and since I think the stock market's in a bubble, and the air will eventually come out of it, I don't know when. You never can predict when a bubble is going to pop or the air come out of it, but it will, and I think that means we're headed for something like a correction of maybe 15 or 30%. So you want to do what Warren Buffett has done, and that is be pretty heavy in cash. Make certain you got some gold in there, and we talked about crypto, and crypto's gone to the moon, but those are very highly speculative assets, and if you want to put them in your portfolio, you're free to do so, but you got to realize that it's putting a tremendous amount of risk in your portfolio. So that if people are thinking about that, they should consider it a highly speculative, risky asset that in fact, given the risk, it reduces the quality of your overall portfolio.
Well, Steve, that was a great conversation, and I always enjoy speaking with you. And I want to thank you very much for spending time with us today. If somebody would like to follow you online and read more of your research, where can they go?
Well, they can follow me on X. It's just at Steve_Hanke. And if you really want to learn about the quantity theory of money and monetary policy and money and banking and how the world goes around, the economic and financial world, that book will help you. And also, if you want to learn how we think the policies affecting money and banking can be improved, that's all laid out in the book. So that's about it, Jimmy.
Well, that is great. I will include a link to your Twitter account and also the book in the show notes below. Once again, Steve, thank you.
By the way, the third lesson I just remembered. I said lessons of life I learned when I was a boy, and I've never forgotten them. One is the value of hard work. Two is being able to eat humble pie and don't toot your horn too much. And the third thing, and the big thing, is the fear of failure. So when I was young, of course, I wasn't spending much time with the books or in school. I did read a lot of the two greatest American authors are Mark Twain and Ernest Hemingway. So I was reading all of the stuff I could get my hands on. So then we get to the fear of failure, and the fear of failure came in because sports was a big deal. In Iowa, where I grew up, sports is more or less the next thing to religion. You know, American football and basketball, all these sports. So I was engaged in that, and we had a top American football team, a little rural place that I came from, and I was very highly ranked in the golfing area, and it was a fear of failure, that comes in with that. Then I went to university, and of course there was one hell of a fear of failure. That was a fear of flunking out. In those days, they at the University of Colorado, where I went off to, they had two flunk out courses: freshman math and freshman English, and the professors were mandated to flunk 50% of the students in each class. Letter grade F, flunk. So the fear of failure was dominated, because can you imagine if Hanke would have flunked out and had to retreat to Iowa with his tail between his legs? God, that would have been hell on earth. And then it's always that fear of failure is in the picture. So I graduated with a PhD ultimately from the University of Colorado, and Lady Luck arrived. I got a position 56 years ago at the great Johns Hopkins University, #1 research university in America. And at that point in time, there had been no economist since World War II who'd actually gone through the ranks and been promoted to a full professor position. So the joy of entering Hopkins wore off in one hell of a hurry, and the fear of failure came in. But I ended up getting promoted. I was promoted through the ranks to full professor, and it turned out it was the fastest promotion to full professor in the history of Johns Hopkins University. But believe me, the fear of failure was in the picture. So you get the drift of these three dominant factors: value of hard work, don't toot your own horn, eat humble pie, and the fear of failure. So those things drive you. And then since my youth, I said we never read the Stoics. I didn't know what a Stoic was, when I was growing up. I've of course read the Stoics now. I am a Stoic from that point of view at a little higher level. But as practitioners, all these agricultural people, you go out to Western Canada, and it's different than the East. They're Stoics. They don't bitch about things. They might bitch about Ottawa, I guess, and the Liberal Party,
Yeah.
but the reality is, in general, they're not whiners and bitchers because of the fact that weather dominates their life, and they know they can't do a damn thing about the weather.
Well, Steve, I always admire our conversations, and I got to say, I admire your work ethic. You've been teaching for 56 years and you're still going strong. I applaud you. Steve,
Well, you're. I'm glad somebody is. It beats the alternative.
it's so true. And you see this so often when you look at people like Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett and so many other people. Even Mick Jagger, he's 80 years old and he's still doing his thing.
Yeah, he's still doing his thing. Now Buffett did say that he was actually going to retire the end of this year. Well, at the end of this year, how old will Warren Buffett be? He's going to be 95.
Yeah.
I think this summer is his birthday. He's going to be 95 by the time he so-called retires. Now, it's hard for me to imagine that he's actually going to totally retire. And what was Munger? I think not Munger went flaming out at he was 99.
Yeah, you got to respect that. Well, once again, Steve, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Great to be with you, Jimmy. Thanks for having me.